have a sister who has a husband who is the poster child of weaponized incompetence. They have 4 kids and she's pregnant. My sister works a full-time job, 40+ hours a week, cleans her entire house, cooks, takes care of all her children without him doing anything. It is seriously mind-blowing that she wakes up at like 4 a.m., cooks breakfast, does chores, gets all of her kids ready for school, takes them all to school and daycare, and all he does is stay home and work. And when his kids get home, after my sister picks them up, of course, he will play with them for a little and play video games until he falls asleep. She actually makes more than him. My fiancé and I had to stay with them for 6 weeks while our home was being renovated, and since we both WFH, we helped her, and it is amazing how much happier she is when she has help. I helped with the kids, and my fiancé even drove her to doctor's appointments. Her husband literally only acknowledges he is a parent when his family is around, then he is a God-fearing, hard-working father of 5. He is the one that wanted more kids. She wanted to stop after her last baby, but he needed more boys. I am seriously concerned not only for her, but her kids as well, because now her oldest is seeing what's happening and trying to help, but my sister is prideful and refuses to let her child do anything. Me and this man have never gotten along. He's been acting like this since their 8-year-old was born. I've tried talking to her about leaving, but she doesn't want her kids to grow up in a broken home. And unfortunately, her experience with our parents' divorce was completely different than mine, so she doesn't understand that a divorce would benefit her kids here because she thinks they need their mom and dad together. Cut to this past weekend, her and her husband threw a pre-Thanksgiving potluck where our entire family plus his was there. I stayed with my sister a few days before because I knew he wouldn't help. So we're at dinner all talking, and I mention we are trying for a baby, and my brother-in-law makes an offhanded comment to him about how hard fatherhood is. And I snapped and said, like you would know. He looked taken aback and asked me what I meant, and I unloaded on him, calling him a pathetic excuse for a man who makes my 8 months pregnant sister do everything for their family. I went off for a solid 10 minutes and he sat there shrinking in his seat. I left. Last night my sister called me and thanked me for standing up for her and told me she appreciated me. Although today I got a very nasty text from him telling me I'm a terrible person, and because I lied in front of his family, his mom is angry at him and is moving in with them to help her out, and I've made him the laughingstock of his family. He certainly thinks so. My husband, Asian, and I, American, welcomed our firstborn 4 weeks ago. The baby is healthy, thank God, but I'm exhausted, haven't fixed my hair, barely able to shower, and cannot sleep. My husband's family had been pressuring us to visit to meet the baby. I tried to hold them off as much as I could, but yesterday, I was surprised to find them standing on the porch. Turns out hubby invited them for dinner. I was embarrassed and felt like I wasn't ready for visitors, judgmental ones at that, cause the house was a mess, y'all. Anyways, my husband sat with them while I fed my son. Then later I asked my husband if we should order takeout for dinner. He said no, because his parents would find this rude and unwelcoming. He suggested that I go inside the kitchen and prepare something, anything long as it's homemade. I said fine, then went and made some mac and cheese. The reason I prepared this meal is because of how easy it is. Once I served the family, my husband's mom looked at me and was appalled. I noticed something was wrong. She asked if I really found it appropriate to serve her and the family mac and cheese. I asked why not, and she went on a rant about how disrespectful this was and that I clearly have no experience in what is right and wrong when it comes to hosting. I said, excuse me? Who said I signed up to host an expected visit from them? And she took it as in I didn't want them there. Her husband said they were just there to finally see the baby that I kept them from seeing for an entire month. That's a whole month of his life they missed out on. We had an argument and they decided to go home. My husband said that deciding to serve his family mac and cheese was more offensive than serving them nothing at all. I told him I was too exhausted to cook their traditional feasts, that I was forced to learn from his mom. He took offense and said that I was being mean and disrespectful towards not only his family but his culture. I went inside the bedroom to stay with my son. My husband stayed on the phone with his family for an hour, then kept giving me the cold shoulder, and refused to eat what I cook in support of his family. I understand how some guests might find it offensive, especially his family, but I was just trying to make a quick homemade meal like my husband wanted. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me he had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. Two things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated. My son Simon, he is 16, moved out of the room he used to share with his little brother and got his own room a few months back. Ever since, he's been complaining about his mom barging in without knocking and interrupting his sleep and studying. Sometimes when he's changing. I know that she's his mother, but he says he's got his own room and has a job and is learning to become an independent adult, but doesn't feel like his privacy is being respected even when that's his mom. He says he's not a kid anymore and is entitled to at least get a knock on the door before she comes in. He was getting tired of her not listening to him, so he came to me and said, "Dad, you need to help me set some clear boundaries with Mom." So I spoke to her about her need to knock before entering Simon's room. She was like, "What? And no, we're family, not strangers. Do you really expect me to foolishly knock on the door 5 times a day? That's ridiculous. Also, the knocks doors in their own home?" I told her my family, for instance. She made a face, then went on a rant about how my family hate each other's and the way they treat each other's like they were strangers is shameful. I told her family or strangers, it's about respecting one's privacy. We had an argument about it, and I told her if she wasn't going to stop with the barging and refuse to knock on the door before entering, then our son will get a lock. She did it again at 11 p.m. She barged in when our son was asleep. He jumped up because he got scared. Once he told me this, I told him to go ahead and get a lock and pay for it with his own money. There was literally no other way. My wife saw it and got upset, and my brother was visiting when she was raising her voice at me if I really went ahead and got a lock for Simon despite her disapproval, and said that I caught her off guard and it's not okay. Because this teaches our children that they can manipulate one parent into doing what they want. I told her that Simon got the lock, not me, and I already warned her about the possibility of him getting a lock, because he was getting tired of her boundary crossing. So she should have expected this outcome. She mentioned the same above points in her defense and said locks mean secrets, and that's not good. My brother was sitting watching while she was complaining. She began chewing him out when he asked her to let Simon keep the lock and said it wasn't a big deal. She stopped talking to me and Simon till we removed the lock, but I've no intentions on doing that.